Hello and welcome to Frontrunner Motorsport. And today was the Australian Grand Prix from Melbourne. Another great race at Albert Park. It's one of my favourite tracks on the calendar. I have some great racing memories from watching Australian Grand Prix of the past. And this wasn't, I guess, a brilliant technical race, but it did have some action and it ended in absolute carnage. There was a lot of damaged Formula 1 cars after this one, and the same goes for the support races, which also had 4 brilliant races this weekend. Formula 2 and Formula 3 were absolutely fantastic, which I think proves a point about circuit design. I've always liked Australia. It's a great track, and it tends to breed great racing, whereas the first 2 rounds in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia were a bit dull. So maybe that's something the organisers should think about, but I guarantee we'll see more of these massively wide open, boring tracks coming onto the calendar as it reaches 30 or 40 races a year. I honestly don't know where to start with this one because it was such a mess and so many things happened. I mean, we got 3 red flags. I don't know when the last time Formula 1 had a race that had 3 red flags, although they were a bit... well, I wouldn't say unnecessary, but I think it was a bit of an overreach. I guess we'll start with Perez in qualifying. Man went off 2 or 3 times, ended up in a barrier out in Q1 starting from the back. My first thought was, oh well, there goes his title challenge. But Sergio Perez did a fantastic job in the race, but really Sunday was the only day that really went well for him in any way, shape or form. The race itself, it was messy at the start, and it was Charles Leclerc who once again had his luck run out, and he got spun by Stroll. Racing incident, it's just too many cars into one corner at the same time. Leclerc spun around and he's out the race. Charles Leclerc, after 3 races, is 10th in the championship. He retired in Bahrain, finished 7th in Saudi Arabia, and has now retired from the Australian Grand Prix. So he has 10 points after 3 races. When you consider last year, he won 2 races by this point and was looking like a genuine title contender. It's a big difference. But that brought out a safety car as they cleared up Leclerc's mess. Which wasn't his fault either, to be honest. It wasn't Lance Stroll's fault, it wasn't Charles Leclerc's fault. But for Leclerc, it's a disastrous start to the season. After the restart, George Russell was leading and doing a very good job of holding back Hamilton and Verstappen. But then Alexander Albon, who had a fantastic qualifying session, qualified 8th for Williams. The car looked really good. If he hadn't crashed, I'm almost certain he would have scored points unless something else happened. But it just got away from him. It was a big accident. That brought out a red flag. Unfortunately for Russell, he pitted for new tyres before the red flag was called and dropped to 7th. So he had his race screwed up by the red flag. Now, I sort of understand that what they're doing with the red flags is trying to keep as many racing laps going as possible. It means they can stop the race, safely put the barrier back together, and then continue without losing any racing. But I sort of wonder, that wall wasn't that damaged, and I think 4 or 5 safety car laps is a worthy sacrifice. I think a red flag is you save red flag for the big things. Like if Albon had totaled his car and barrier and bits and pieces were sprayed all across the track, maybe. Or if 2 or 3 cars were involved and were stuck in various positions, okay. But 1 car and 1 damaged wall, is that really worthy of a red flag? And of course the rule of the red flag is anyone can change their tyres. So people who pitted were screwed and it wasn't really their fault. And I guess this has to go down as a bad strategy call from Mercedes. But again, It's just one of those things. If it had stayed on the safety car and only Russell pitted, it would have worked out in his favour. I guess the rule change should be that no one's allowed to touch the car during red flag, other than like basically keeping it alive. You don't want them bursting into flames. And they shouldn't be allowed to change tyres. And it just keeps the race neutral then. The race has been stopped, so nothing should be changed on the car. It should be like the car should just be kept in like stasis, like exactly as they were. Do not touch them. Just park them up, keep them cool. We'll send them back out in half an hour once everything's ready. I think changing the tyres just changes the race. And it was definitely not fair on George Russell. After the restart, Russell down in 7th, didn't last too much longer. His engine blew up quite spectacularly and a bit of fire. Very rare for Mercedes to have mechanical issues. And I wonder if that's going to be a concern for them going forward. They did have a lot of extra pace this weekend. Is that because they've turned the engines up and they're just like, fuck it, go for it? I doubt it. I think they're a bit more scientific than that. All the moaning they do about this car being terrible and not worth shit, it seems to be doing okay. I would actually sort of warn against changing the design completely, because there's something there. It does work. They are picking up results. And surely if you go in a new direction, that means a whole lot of design work and stuff you've got to do. And what happens if they change it and it's not as quick? They're not that far off Red Bull. As much as Hamilton says this is the most dominant car ever, it's not. His Mercedes, back in the past, that was the most dominant car ever. Verstappen has an amazing car this year, and that's sort of been making a lot of that. They have a big advantage on the DRS. Well, that's good design work. They have Adrian Newey. It tends to happen occasionally. But it's not the most dominant car in Formula 1 ever. It's just very quick. But I think Mercedes, they weren't that far off in qualifying. During the race, maybe that's where they're losing pace. But they're still, I would say Mercedes are ahead of the Ferraris and the Aston Martins. The Aston Martins are quick, but the package doesn't seem to work as well over a full race distance. Alonso did a fantastic job, as did Lance Stroll. But I do think Mercedes have the second best car, and I don't think they're a million miles behind Red Bull. I think it's honestly 1 or 2 upgrades away from being close to that pace. Will Red Bull upgrade at the same time? Maybe, but that's Formula 1. This is what we were complaining about for years, Mercedes dominating and no one being able to catch them. Well, now it's Red Bull's turn, and it's sort of the same thing. Maybe Formula 1 should have something to sort of bring about some performance parity. Like, you get it in touring cars all the time. Like when you had Audi in their four-wheel drive cars in the 90s, they were so much quicker than everyone else, just because they had more traction. But they put a weight ballast on them to slow them down a bit, bring them back to the pack. And it kind of worked. The racing was closer between all the manufacturers, but Audi still won. It was still a good car. They've done it with the BMWs as well, with the rear-wheel drive. Especially off the starts, they have a big advantage. So they sort of work out a ballast to keep it even during the race. It works itself out. And therefore BMW don't dominate all the time. It works, and I wonder if Formula 1 should do something similar. I've always sort of been against it because it's like Formula 1 should be a bit purer in touring cars. Like, what's fine for touring cars isn't fine for Formula 1. But World Endurance Championship as well, where they've sort of opened up the regulations a bit. There's like parameters that they have to meet, but how they get there, that's up to them. I think Formula 1 should do something similar to that. I think that would be an interesting step forward for Formula 1. The other thing I would say they should change, or look at least, is the mid-race. This race was good for maybe the first third, and then the last maybe quarter. Work out your maths yourself. The middle part of the race, everyone's kind of just following everyone. No one's really making a real go at it. They're all conserving tyres. Gaps sort of fluctuate a little bit, but they sort of stay within the same range, so no one's in dirty air. It's made me think that they should probably bring back refueling. because that would put people on different strategies throughout the race. Might make the middle of the race more interesting. I would say get rid of DRS, bring back refueling. It works for IndyCar. If you want to have something a little bit extra, have some kind of push to pass. Again, works well for IndyCar. And I honestly think it would make the middle part of the races more exciting, and the end part, because you're going to see how everyone sort of gets back to that point of getting to the finish and after their strategies have worked out. Ferrari might be against this, making things more complicated. Definitely not what they want right now, but I do think it would help sort of bring about a bit more action in the middle of the race, a bit more intrigue, and maybe the tyres as well. Maybe the tyres are a bit too good and a bit of degradation. Sort of finding a level between making them a bit tougher to drive whilst not impossible. I want to see them squirm about a bit, but I also don't want to see punctures and people spinning because the tyres are useless. And I don't want to see like 20 pit stops for tyres every race. But if you had 2 or 3 pit stops with fuel and tyres, I think definitely the middle of the race would definitely be more interesting, because I think that's where Formula 1 suffers a lot of the time. It's once you've got over the start and everyone's spread out a bit and they're in conservation mode, they tend to just follow each other. Different strategies, people have to get past each other to make their strategy work. I think it'd be a bit more exciting. Back to this race anyway, because where were we? Russell. So yeah, Russell blew up. Shame for him, because he was driving very, very well and he had a fantastic qualifying session. Mercedes, a rare mechanical issue. Big shame for George. But we got a virtual safety car for that one as he moved his car. Not too difficult, that's fine. This is when the race sort of simmered down a little bit. Verstappen got past Hamilton pretty easily, blew past him on DRS, which again, I would say it's half the Red Bull performance, but also half that DRS zone was very, very long. I think it was a bit too easy. 4 DRS zones? I don't think that was necessary. And still we didn't get that much overtaking. Around this time as well, Perez is climbing through the field. He's made some brilliant overtakes in this race. Took him a while to catch Norris and Hulkenberg and get past them, but he did eventually do that. And it was a fantastic drive from the Mexican. Really, in terms of championship preservation, this was as good as he could have done. I don't think he's ever going to challenge for the podiums. It was still a fantastic drive. Not going to take anything away from Sergio Perez this weekend. As we were getting to the end of the race, Kevin Magnussen hit the wall. Bit of a strange incident. This brought out the red flag. I think that was a mistake. I know this is in reaction to, I can't remember what race it was, but we finished the race on the safety car and people are like, oh, that's stupid, they shouldn't do that. But a red flag, 2 races left, usually they just end the race. Give out full points, it's over 75% of the race distance. But no, another red flag, everyone back to the pits, everyone changes tyres, back onto the grid for a grid start. Again, I think a mistake. If you're going to do this, do a rolling start. It avoids a lot of late chaos, as we saw this this third start. Lost track. This is the third start, right? Yes. This was where the chaos happened. And we saw, it started with Sainz and Alonso getting together. Sainz tagged Alonso, Alonso spun. Shame, Aston Martin had a very good race. But that caused Ocon to run onto the infield. And as he came back on, he got tangled with his teammate and they both hit the wall. Alpine, again, had a fantastic race for them. Ended in a wall right at the end of the race because of all this chaos. At the same time, Logan Sargent and De Vries tripped over each other and ended up in the gravel at the first corner. So they were out. And I think Perez had to take to the grass. I think he dropped back. And the red flags came out for a third time, with Verstappen in the lead from Hamilton. But behind him, Sainz was still in third, but Hulkenberg was fourth. And then it was like, I think the McLarens were like 5th and 6th, and Zhou and Tsunoda right up there, and Bottas. It had mixed things up a lot. And if that was the result, it would have been an interesting one. And Nico Hulkenberg is maybe the person I feel most sorry for, because if that had stayed as the result, Sainz would have got a 5-second penalty. Hulkenberg would have got his first podium in Formula 1. Haas did attempt to appeal the decision to change the result to whatever they fantasized, but they denied it. Hulkenberg did score points, but it could have been a podium after 175, 176 races or something. I would imagine he's probably kicking something very hard in his hotel room tonight. But a lot of cars were damaged and out of the race. Alonso did manage to crawl back round. And then, under red flag, they had to sort out the order. And the rules are a bit strange here, because the red flags came out before they completed the first sector. It goes back to what the order was on the grid. But all the cars that are damaged obviously can't go around the track for the final lap behind the safety car, so they lose their positions. This was disastrous news for the Alpines, because Gasly was running really well. I think he was 5th. He lost that position. Although after the restart he may have dropped back anyway. As I said, it was a bit messy. Even if it wasn't an accident, the order would have been mixed up anyway. So this meant the Alpines were out. Logan Sargent, Nick De Vries. I actually honestly forget who else didn't make it to the end. That might be it, actually. What else? And yeah, so they follow the safety car around for the last lap. It's still not really an exciting finish. It was just sort of a mess. At least it gives you something to talk about, I guess. But Verstappen won yet again. Great victory for him. Hamilton with Mercedes' best result so far. Their first podium of the year, I think. And Aston Martin 3rd and 4th. Great result for them. Both McLarens in the points. Hulkenberg in the points. Tsunoda and Guan Yu Zhou both in the points. Sainz, his 5-second penalty dropped him to 12th. Last of the cars still running. Bottas also missed out on points because he was 11th. It was definitely a messy finish, but I did enjoy this race. And at least stuff happened, unlike the first two. Although I'm sure at this point Charles Leclerc wishes things didn't happen. I guess we'll finish by going through every team. Red Bull, Verstappen couldn't do any better. Perez did a fantastic job as well. Definitely still the team to beat. They are starting to pull a lead in the Constructors and Drivers' Championship. They're definitely going to be tough to beat at any race this year. Whether they can keep this run going all year round, it's doubtful. I do think they'll be caught by the end of the year. Mercedes, disappointment for George Russell, who was driving fantastically, but they'll take 2nd place. Hamilton never wins in Australia, so I don't think he'll be too disappointed with 2nd. Aston Martin, 3rd and 4th. Honestly, it's where they are right now. 3 third place finishes in a row for Alonso is amazing. They wouldn't dream of that before now. I don't know what it's going to take for them to win. I don't know if they need like one big upgrade or just something to happen to the cars in front. But Alonso is doing a fantastic job. Stroll is doing a decent job as well. It was unfortunate for him to have his mechanical issues in Saudi Arabia. But, I mean, as far as Lance Stroll goes, I think this is definitely going to be his best season ever. He's still a long way off Alonso, but I think he knows that. I don't think he would have ever thought he'd be ahead of Alonso. And he's doing a reasonable job. Ferrari, this was obviously a massive missed opportunity for them. Sainz and Leclerc never really looked quick this weekend. They definitely looked slower than Red Bull, Aston Martin and Mercedes. But for Leclerc to get spun out at the third corner, and then Sainz to get hit with a penalty, otherwise he would have finished 4th. And I do think that penalty was unfair. It was such a mess. And Alonso himself said that he didn't have a problem with it. Nothing was hurt. He still finished 3rd, so it shouldn't have been a penalty. And I sort of agree with Crofty and the commentators when they said maybe it should have been dealt with after the race. The stewards had called Sainz and Alonso, discussed it together, common sense, just leave it, it's fine. Nothing was too damaged. That would have been a better solution than to give Sainz a penalty, but as it is, Ferrari scored no points this weekend, and it just continues the disasters that have been building up for them over the last year. Honestly, I don't think we thought it was going to be a quick fix. Like they're just going to change the team leader and hopefully things will work out. But they do seem to be slipping back to where they were 3 or 4 years ago. Hopefully they can bring some upgrades, get the car working properly, and Leclerc can start finishing races. Because they both deserve to, they're both driving well. The Ferrari's up there. It's not challenging the top cars. It's not challenging Verstappen, Perez if he's running up the top. They're struggling to keep up with the Astons and Mercedes teams, but I don't think it'll take too much to get that Ferrari right in there. But as it is, this year so far has been a disaster for them, and this was hopefully peak disaster for Ferrari. Alpine were running really well. Gasly had a fantastic race and Ocon was in the points. Very unfortunate for them to tangle with each other. Racing incident, no one's fault. So they'll be really disappointed. But it's not the end of the world. They at least showed they do have some performance. McLaren, they didn't look like they had a lot of pace. Norris was doing very well to run in the top 10 anyway. And Perez, once he caught him, got past him very easily. But Norris did catch Hülkenberg and pass him, and they got a decent result. Piastri, his first points in Formula 1, he'll be very happy, and it was at his home race as well. Hopefully, McLaren can make some big changes to their car to get it right back where Norris was 2020, 2021. That McLaren was good. I think it could get up there, but I think they are going to be a midfield team this year. Haas, strange incident for Magnussen, but he didn't look on the pace all weekend. Hülkenberg looked good, and obviously he nearly had a podium. But they're still back-end team. But I do think Haas look like they're ahead of Alfa Romeo, AlphaTauri and Williams. So it's not too bad for them at the moment. They need to keep it up. They could do with scoring a few more points here and there. Alfa Romeo, I mean, they were lucky to get points, but Zhou has been running well. He doesn't score many points, but he tends to have a lot of bad luck as well. It was a good result for Alfa Romeo, really, to get 2 points. Same for AlphaTauri. They have not looked like a team that can run in the points, but Tsunoda getting 10th. He'll be happy with that. It's been a while since he scored points. 10th is the best he's done since like the start of last year, so I'm sure he'll take it. And Williams, Albon will be massively disappointed because he had a lot of pace in that car and he was doing really well, but it was a big crash. Sargent, I mean, he was never really challenging the points, but it ended up him not finishing as well. So disappointment for them. Nick De Vries for AlphaTauri, I think I forgot to mention, but again, I think a case of getting used to Formula 1 in a car that's not really worthy of points. So I think he is struggling a little bit. But I don't think it's the end of the world. I think these things can change very quickly. And you know what? 3 races into the championship, every team has scored points, and only Logan Sargent and Nick De Vries have not scored points in the championship this year. So Sargent is actually the only driver on the grid who has never scored points in Formula 1. That's quite impressive after 3 races into the year. Anyway, the next race is not for another 4 weeks, I think. It's right at the end of April. Is it Azerbaijan? I think so. The calendar's weird. We're going from like Australia to Azerbaijan to America and then back to Europe. So, I mean, I thought they were making a big change to this calendar to sort of make it a bit more efficient. This seems like a bit of a loop. And of course, we're in Australia at the moment, which we've come from the Middle East. It's all over the place. I honestly, it's still hard to see anyone beating Red Bull right now. Definitely still the quickest car, but obviously this was the track where Verstappen had a puncture in 2021 and lost the race. I don't know if that still plays on their mind even 2 years later, and they've had another race there since. And Perez does do very well on these street circuits, so I think he might be a threat at this one. We're going to have to wait a long time and see. There's not actually a lot of motorsport on next weekend. As far as I know, probably NASCAR and Super Formula and pretty much nothing else. It's going to be a very quiet weekend next weekend. But Australian Grand Prix of 2023 was, at the very least, entertaining. It did drag in the middle, but it was not a terrible race. It was a very messy one, but I enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and leave your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of the Australian Grand Prix? I'm going to cut this video down because it's like half an hour long. So yeah, thank you for watching and have a good one.